Well, hello everybody. We are we're in a 2020 Toyota RAV4 TRD Off-Road. This is a view from our Garmin tandem dash cam, and we are north of the Detroit Metro near Lake Orion on Indian Lake Road, which is a stretch of gravel that goes on here for about 2 miles. There's some kind of rugged twists and turns. There's a lot of bumps, and it's quite narrow. So what I want to do is I want to give you a rundown here of the vehicle that we're driving and just kind of give you an idea of how it handles out here on the trails. So the TRD Off-Road, the RAV4, underneath the hood that we have, you can see the hood out there, underneath the hood, 2.5 liter 4-cylinder engine, 203 horsepower, and 184 pound-feet of torque, makes short work of these trails. Little dip there. So if you live in rural America and you travel gravel roads like this a lot, or you're on the trails, Toyota RAV4 is, in our view, has been impressive. This is about the 5th time we've driven this road this week, and actually the other night, 2 nights ago, when we drove it, it was raining completely. So but the RAV4 handles surprisingly well. So we have to drive I-75 getting up here. And so on the open road, the RAV4 it's quieter than you might think with the TRD off-road suspension. And it's actually quieter than you might think, even going through all of these bumps here on a trail like this. But again, if you travel roads like this frequently, or if you live where there's snow and you don't necessarily want a big SUV, but you want some 4x4 chops, the Toyota RAV4 TRD Pro is the ticket. We're going to go through some tighter corners here. 8-speed automatic transmission, by the way. Falken Wild Peak tires. So they've got grooves and sipes in them to really kick away this dirt and any mud that would be left over from the rain, or if you're traveling this while it is raining. If it's snowing, this is an ideal set of tires to have to kick all that slush away. Now, as you roll through these corners, Toyota has a system in this TRD Off-Road, in this RAV4. The dynamic torque vectoring is what they use. All-wheel drive system with a multi-train select. And with the multi-train select, there's a handful of them. You've got a mud and a sand mode, you've got a normal mode, an eco mode, and a sport mode, you've got a snow mode. But specifically here, out here on Indian Lake Road, we're using what's called the rock and dirt mode. And what the rock and dirt mode does is it changes up the powertrain distribution accordingly. So what happens in the dynamic torque vectoring is, under normal circumstances, you're going to get a rear driveline disconnect. So when we drove up here on 75, see these narrow roads here? Big Ford truck coming. Notice how I can squeeze right in and through. The handling on this TRD Pro and this RAV4, really crisp. 8.6-inch ground clearance too, by the way. So there's not a lot of things out here that are going to get in the way, especially if you had a big clump of snow or anything like that. There's just the RAV4 just is going to climb over everything. So I mentioned the dynamic torque vectoring before. Here's where it's going to get really interesting. So it can actually kick power side to side to the wheel that's got the most traction. And you can see here how I'm going through these corners quite easily and still encountering traffic. Those Falken tires really gripping. But yeah, in this rock and dirt mode, so like I said, so again, as I roll through those corners, that dynamic torque vectoring, sending power side to side. You can actually see that on a screen here in the RAV4, but it sends power side to side to the wheel that has the most traction. But when you drive up here, I'm going to hit this here, look at this. Went through that smooth. I was hoping for a big splash, but not really enough water. But when you drive normally, what ends up happening is that rear driveline disconnect, that's going to send most of the power. That's going to send most of the power to the front with that rear driveline disconnect. So when you are driving normally, like when we drove up here on Interstate 75, most of that dynamic torque vectoring, most of that power is sent to the front wheels. And the reason being is in the interest of fuel economy. We've been averaging 30 miles to the gallon this whole trip, even in this rock and dirt mode as we've been on the throttle a little bit. This will be fun here. So let me see if I can get this, and let me see if I can get a big splash going here. And I can. So the TRD Off-Road, the RAV4, so you can have quite a bit of fun with it if you are hitting the trails. But in the practical sense, if you drive roads like this, if you live where it snows, you don't want a big SUV, again, this is a great vehicle for that. Now underneath, when you get out and you look at this, when you look at this RAV4, you're going to see these red coil springs. So they have a special off-road tuning, twin tube shock design, and Toyota says those are revalved. That's the terminology that they use. They're revalved with an internal rebound spring, and then there's new bump stops which help maximize compression and direction, and they help optimize wheel travel, and they improve body control, especially over large bumps and dips. So if you go back just a couple of minutes ago when we were rolling through those corners, what Toyota has designed with the RAV4 Off-Road is really a complete and total system. So you have that dynamic torque vectoring that's working to shift power side to side, front to back, however it needs it when you're out here on these trails. But then you also have the brick and mortar suspension that's helping to smooth out a lot of these smaller bumps, that's helping to keep the RAV4 planted, and then along with those Falcon tires as well. You also have, again, in speaking of brick and mortar suspension, you've also got your independent McPherson strut front suspension, which has a stabilizer bar, and then you've got a TRD, so Toyota Racing Development, TRD tuned multi-link rear suspension with another stabilizer bar. So the RAV4 is pretty sure-footed. And if you need to tow a trailer, you've got a 3,500 pound tow capacity. So if you're going on these dirt roads, say to a lake or somewhere, to a piece of property out in the North 40, not only do you have the off-road chops in the RAV4 TRD Pro, but you've also got a little bit of muscle with this 2.5 liter engine that you can pull a small trailer or a small boat, up to 3,500 pounds. So that way, you've got the rock and the dirt mode, so you can get there, and you've got a little towing capacity as well. So that was about a 2-mile drive or so, give or take, on Indian Lake Road up here by Lake Orion, just north of Detroit, in our 2020 Toyota RAV4 TRD Off-Road. It's a press vehicle we've been driving this week. And again, I mean, it's despite the off-road leanings, it is quiet on the open road. Like I said, when we drove up here, it's a lot quieter than you expect. And out here in the dirt, very capable vehicle. So all things considered, we are pretty impressed.